When it comes to methods, there are things that can go terribly wrong.
They go terribly wrong.
And I said, what are you doing running? And you're saying it was really good out?
It's the perfect texture for running. Very low impact on its dry snow so your feet don't get wet.
Go ahead and keep on the run. I'm sorry to have kept you, but I appreciate you guys talking with us. All right, thanks. We've seen a lot of people out here, like you said, running, sledding, just enjoying it. One thing, oops, that can happen.
The barn was only used for 2 weeks of the year for breeding, so it wasn't insured.
Here we have our calculator class with 3 instance methods that we've defined, the double method, the add method, and the subtract method. Let me demonstrate a number of things that can cause some problems. The first is, let's move this end up here. This actually happens more often than you might think, but one might accidentally define these methods outside of the class itself. Now here again, we instantiate, that is, we create a new instance of the calculator class. That is, we tell the calculator class to produce a new instance of a calculator, and we store it inside this variable called calc, and then we attempt to call the subtract method on this calculator instance. Here we get an error on line 19 of the calculator file. So that would be right here, this puts statement, calc.subtract. Private method subtract called for calculator. Now that's a tricky error message, but what's going on here is that there is no built-in subtract method for the calculator because these methods have been defined outside of the calculator. So let's make sure once again that these methods are within the calculator class. Only then will they apply to the calculator class. Okay, another thing that can go wrong is by passing the wrong number of arguments to a method. So here we have the subtract method, and as we defined this instance method here, you can see that we've set it up to expect to receive 2 arguments, number 1 and number 2. What would happen if we called the subtract method and only passed in 1 parameter? Let's see. Here we can see that we get an error message saying wrong number of arguments 1 for 2. That actually happens to be a pretty clear error message. It is saying we supplied the wrong number of arguments to a method. There should be 2, but we've only supplied it with 1. And that is indeed the case. The subtract method expects 2 arguments, but we've only supplied it with a single argument. Let's also note the line number in which this error message is occurring. You could actually see there are 2 line numbers noted, calculator.rb line 11, as well as calculator.rb line 18. Now the way you read this is that the line that actually triggered the error message directly is the topmost line. So since in this first line of the error message, we see that it's line 11 that triggers the error, that is the most direct line of code that is causing this error. When it then says from calculator.rb line 18, that is saying, well, line 18 is what caused line 11 to be triggered, and now line 11 is triggering the error message. We're saying that the actual error message is happening right here on line 11 because we're calling a subtract method but not supplying it the correct number of arguments. We're only supplying it 1 out of the 2 arguments. But line 11 is triggered because of line 18. Indeed, on line 18, that is where we actually call and invoke the subtract method. But that triggers this actual method to be called, and the most direct line of code that is causing the error is line 11. But line 11 itself is called from line 18. This concept of having multiple lines that all take part in this bug, in this error, is known as the stack trace. Think of it as like a stack of lines of code that are involved. The uppermost line is the first line you always want to look at, and then you can dig into further lower lines in the stack trace to see what actually triggered the uppermost line, but it's the uppermost line that actually causes the error itself. Now, what would happen were we to call let's say the double method. Now the double method expects only one parameter. What would happen if we threw in 2 arguments? Let's see. Here we get a similar error message, but here it says wrong number of arguments 2 for 1. That means to say that the method is only expecting 1 argument, but we've given it 2. So thankfully, some error messages are pretty straightforward.